Okay, so I'm wearing a black vest and a white t-shirt. Now take a look at what you're wearing. Do you ever ask yourself why you're wearing it? This might seem like a silly question, but believe me, the answer is a lot more complex than you think. Today, we're going to be talking about the relationship between fashion and gender equality throughout the ages. In this series, we're going to discuss how the two are related and zone in on the importance of a gender-neutral fashion. Now, to illustrate this, we're going to be specifically looking at the history of heels. In general, clothing was used for a variety of different purposes. At first, self-expression wasn't one of them, but protection against the elements was. Later on, style became more of a means of communicating sex, age, gender, culture, geographic area, and historical era. This is still true because clothing just happens to be one of the first things we notice about another. However, our perception of fashion is ever-changing because it is culturally defined. So, in years from now, what you're wearing today will probably not be viewed in the same light. Like any piece of clothing, shoes were made for a reason, to protect your feet. But heels? Seriously? They're certainly not practical. In fact, they have been proven to cause more harm than good. So why were they made in the first place? And why are they so heavily feminized today? To understand this, we have to take a blast to the past. Let's start in the 10th century. This is when the high-heeled shoe was invented. It was first worn by the Persian cavalry for the sole purpose of keeping their feet in their stirrups. The heel gave them the stability they needed to stand upright to shoot their bows and arrows. So, yeah, the high-heeled shoe was specifically made to be worn by men, and not by women. Now, this Southwest Asian invention traveled to Europe when the Shah of Persia, Abbas I, sent some diplomats to Europe in 1599. Upon their arrival, the Europeans could not get over the military heels that they came strutting in, so they adopted the style for themselves. 1-inch heels became the norm on and off horses. They were a fashionable statement piece for wealthy aristocratic men. This trend started primarily because the Europeans wanted to emulate the strength of the Persians. Wearing heels is also incredibly painful, so it takes more strength than some think. However, the impracticality of the heel ironically made sense since the idea of wearing a shoe you couldn't work in was a sign of wealth and high-class status. In fact, under King Louis XIV of France's order in the 1670s, he officially ruled the red heel as being an exclusive shoe for his chosen members of court. Bleeding into the 18th century, it was a red sole heel that came to symbolize a more prestigious power for his chosen people. The custom of the time was that the higher and redder the heel, the more powerful the wearer. Eventually, the lower class started to wear heels as well, so that meant that the rich had to increase the height of their own shoes to reflect their social status. And just like that, the high heel was born. From symbolizing prestige to military prowess and fashionable taste, men's heels have gone through varied cultural meanings. While this was happening, high-class women were attempting to emulate men's fashion, so they started to wear men's shoes to signify their wealth and status as well. That meant for a period of time, the upper class participated in a unisex shoe trend. But don't be mistaken, that was certainly not an attempt at fighting for gender equality through fashion. That came way later. Instead, the male heel became broader and sturdier, and the female heel became more delicate to distinguish it from the other. But eventually, these differences weren't enough to sustain the shoe in men's fashion, since it became increasingly gendered. So long, unisex shoe! At the same time, the movement known as the Enlightenment prioritized education over privilege. So, men's fashion similarly shifted towards more practical and simplified clothing. That meant that heels had to go. Men stopped wearing heels around 1740. They were deemed to be impractical and perceived as being too feminine. On the other hand, women continued to wear heels up until around the time of the French Revolution in 1789. For roughly half a century, heels were considered a thing of the past, but they were brought back by Victorians and the rise of erotic photography in the 19th century. Suggestive photographs of women wearing heels ultimately re-established the trend. Erotic photographers of the time thought the shoe accentuated a woman's appearance. Not only did it elongate one's figure, but it also adjusted one's posture in a way that was perceived as sexy. The association with pornography and pinup girls during World War II led the high heels to be seen as an erotic adornment for women. By the 1950s, the heels saw new heights and proportions. Thanks to the advanced technologies after World War II, the stiletto was invented. There were so many different styles to choose from now, but none for men. However, in the 1960s, a modern version of the 10th century Persian cavalry heel grew in popularity. You guessed it, it's the cowboy boot. From this point forward, a collective effort was made to break gender barriers in fashion. Although heels are still considered to be a women's shoe, men have been challenging this reality since the 1970s. The disco hippie era of the 70s was all about equality, setting the tone for genderless clothing. Platform heels were adored by both men and women alike, and the rise of androgynous superstars, such as David Bowie, attempted to change the discourse surrounding fashion and gender altogether. He was seen in both stilettos and platform shoes. The Beatles were also influential artists who popularized the Cuban heel, paving the way for Chelsea boots in men's fashion. High-heeled shoes were once the epitome of masculinity, and now they're regarded as inherently feminine. Our perception of the item has simply changed based on our cultural understanding of what it symbolizes in the modern day. The invention of the heel was ultimately made for the purpose of war, not seduction or female sexuality. In the past, the heel signified power and wealth, and today it's used to push boundaries of binary gender norms. So maybe one day society will collectively abandon the idea that men can't wear heels. 'Cause, let's be real, we all know that's one hell of a look. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to learn next. And if you'd like this video and want to learn more, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.